Hi everybody. In this video we are going to look at adding some micro displacement to drum beats using the with swing function. So micro displacements is the idea is instead of having our drum sounds completely quantized to like a specific grid or a specific subdivision of like a quarter note or an eighth note, we are just going to kind of nudge them either a little early or a little later than where that actual subdivision would happen. And this can give the sound a little bit more of a human feel. It can be a little more laid back. It can kind of push things a little forward a little more. This is a style that was popularized by the hip-hop producer J Dilla and subsequently in a lot of lo-fi hip-hop beats that you might hear use a similar type of technique. So first thing we're going to do is take a look at the with swing function, which I have here in the documentation. So with swing basically is going to take a pulse or some kind of tick that we have going on and is going to just shift it a little bit. If we look here, the shift is one of the arguments and it defaults to 0.1 beats. Now, the name with swing I feel is a little bit misleading. I did a previous tutorial about how to create swing rhythms in Sonic Pi using arrays, which is a little bit more of a straightforward way of going about if you really want to get like a true kind of more traditional swing sound of like a long, short kind of thing. And you can check out that tutorial to see a bit more what that is. But the with swing function doesn't really necessarily give us a swing feel in the traditional sense. So what I'm going to do is create a live loop here. I'm just going to call it SW for swing. And so with swing is a block of codes, which means I need to have the name of the function and then a do and then an end. And what I'm going to put here is just a hi-hat sound. And we'll just use these new hi-hat sounds we have in 4.5 version of Sonic Pi. And I'm just for the sake of ease going to sleep for 1 so we can kind of keep track of the time that we are getting here using this swing function. So I'm just going to run it. Okay, so let's go back here and look at the log. So if we see here, the first time we get comes in at 0.1. Now, just for contrast, if I were to comment out this block here and just have the sample and the sleep, we see we come right in at 0. But with swing, the first sample comes in at 0.1. And then the next 3 sounds happen right on 1 and they sleep for 1. But that first one you see here, it kind of rounds. We're off by like, a teeny decimal point. But for what we're looking at, we consider this 0.1. And the next one comes in at 1, next one at 2, next one at 3. And then after that, this one comes in 4.099, which would be 4.1. And then we're back to 5. And so what we're seeing is here, every 4th beat where we see a displacement of 0.1. So instead of happening on 0 or instead of happening on 4, it's going to happen 0.1 later than that. And that is the result of this with swing function here. So again, if we look, the shift, which is what we are seeing when it doesn't happen precisely on 0 or one of those subdivisions, it's slightly displaced. So we can change that. It defaults to 0.1 here, but this is the first argument. So for example, if I go in here and were to do, I'm going to do basically a third, and that's sort of a bit more traditional within the swing rhythm, but we're still not going to get that effect here. But if I run it now, so we see that this time the first one came in at 0.333, which is this number here, 1 divided by 3.0, and I have to do 0.0 in order to get a floating point number returned there. And then it comes 1, then 2, then 3, and then comes back around. Now, why is it doing it every 4? So if we look back here, we have pulse as another argument, and how often will it apply the swing, and this is going to default to 4, which means that it's going to displace 1 out of 4 sounds here. And another argument, I'm going to not look at this tick because this is about if we want more than one with swing and one blocker. It's getting a bit more complicated than we need. But this other argument here is called offset, which is basically telling us which pulse or do we want to shift, if depending on how many we have, and right now we default to every 4. So what I can do here is I'm going to do offset, and right now the offset is 0, and just to kind of give an example to sort of play along with. So we have, say, beat 0, beat 1, beat 2, beat 3. So if offset is 0, then it's going to go like this. The first one will be displaced by this amount, and then we'll have 4 regular ones, and then it will continue that pattern. So we run it here just like we saw. The first one gets displaced. Now if I set offset to 1, what it's going to do is shift it, so it's not going to displace the first one, it's actually going to displace the last one here. And so we run it 1, 2, and then that third one, or the last one, comes a little later, and then makes that one seem like comes a little earlier, but does come on time. If I were to set this now to offset 2, it's going to shift this pulse. And then finally, if I were to offset 3, it's going to shift this pulse. 3 there. And here you have it. And so what we're getting here is sort of this displacement creates this kind of long, short effect, which is sort of the idea of swing, is kind of creating this displacement so that you have one sound that there's a longer space between one sound and the next, and then a shorter space between that sound and the sound that follows it, which creates that sort of swing feel that you might be thinking. Now, another argument we can add to this, I'm going to get rid of the offset for a second, is the pulse. So right now it's every 4, but we could change that. So for example, if I were to put a 2 here, so this is, again, the shift, how much we want to move the block, or to move the sound, how much we want to displace it, and then the next would be pulse there. So in this case, it's only going to do once every 2. And so if I run this, so you see it sort of displaces the first, and then just comes on the one on the next, and then displaces that. So this is now every other one that it is doing that. And again, I could do the offset, and this time it'll displace the second of the 2 sounds. And just for now, to kind of speed this up a little bit, kind of get this. This is kind of giving us a bit more, and I'll even speed up a little bit. This is sort of giving a bit more of that kind of traditional swing feel. Long, short, long, short, long, short, long. So I wouldn't personally use the with swing function to try and get that swing sound. I would probably use the array method or something similar that I did in a previous tutorial. But now that we kind of understand how this with swing block works, let's now try and use it to add some sort of very subtle displacements and shifts to a drum beat using this method. So I am actually going to get rid of this and create a new live loop. Just going to call it D. And I'm going to do with swing here again. But here what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have it randomly choose. So the idea is I want it to have a bit more of kind of replicate like a human playing here, and maybe exaggerate it a little bit. But the idea is, so I can not just do positive numbers, I could also do negative numbers as well. So meaning that it would actually happen slightly before the beat instead of being displaced slightly later. It would happen a bit sooner. So I'm going to do negative 0.08. So this is kind of a very subtle shift here, and then I'm going to go positive 0.08. So basically what this is saying is it's going to displace the sound somewhere between negative 0.08 and positive 0.08, which could be then. And so the displacement is actually going to be very subtle. So it could, for example, be like 0.01 or negative 0.03, which is a pretty subtle shift. And almost hard to perceive kind of on its own. So, and then I'm also going to do that every time. So instead of doing it like 2, or the default would be every 4 times, I'm going to have it every single time it's going to displace it slightly. So I'm going to sample. In this case, I'm going to make a ring, and I'm actually going to do 1 kick drum sound and 1 snare drum sound that we have here in Sonic Pi. I'm just going to iterate back and forth between those, and I'm going to sleep for 1, and I'm going to take this down to maybe like 88. So now if I run this, we're going to hear this kind of kick snare, and they're going to be just slightly displaced, either a little bit before where the downbeat would happen or a little bit after the downbeat. So more or less, it's just sort of a boom, bap, boom, bap. You can kind of perceive that it's just slightly off a little bit. Now to sort of drive that home a little more, to make it a little more clear, I'm going to add a second loop here, and I'm going to sync with that. And in here, I'm going to go back to that hat sound I have. But this I'm just going to have sort of straight eighth notes, just 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And there's no displacement, so this is going to be sort of really locked in to those subdivisions, and that will sort of help bring out these subtle changes that are happening in the kick and the snare drum. So here it's got sort of a little bit of extra bounce in there. It's subtle, but it's there. So just for contrast, let's take out this with swing, and now we're just going to hear kick and snare exactly on the downbeats 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is just straightforward, always hitting exactly on the downbeat. But now to go back, just to hear it one more time. So just a little bit off there. So we get this kind of micro displacement, this sort of teeny shift in there. That If you're not really listening for it, you might not catch it, but it's there, and it just gives it just a little bit of a different feel than that sort of straightforward. So if you're kind of going for that more lo-fi, hip-hop, J Dilla kind of drum sound, then using this with swing function is a helpful way to do that. And there's plenty of other ways you could probably apply this to just get a tiny bit of displacement, or maybe some more prominent displacement, or even if you wanted to try and do something that swings a little more. But this is one method that I found that I kind of like working with the with swing function. So that is how it is done, and hopefully you could take that and find some useful application for it.